everyone, welcome to Cuberviews episode 56. This is your host, Ian Braverman. I hope you're having a really good day. Today, I am joined by Jane McKinney. How are you doing?
Doing great. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm always happy to talk cube, and this is a cube that I've been very interested in talking about and playing. I haven't even had a chance to play it. It's too popular. I can't get into it at CubeCon and everything. So I'm excited to have a discussion with you today. But first, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jane. I am the designer of the ball pit. That's one of the things we'll talk about a fair bit today. I've made some other cubes, the tabletop cube. I write random things about cube, like articles on how to write primers. Sometimes found recording other podcasts like the Pack One Slick Ones. I love almost everything about cube in Magic and participate in almost no Magic other than cube. That's very much the niche I have found myself comfortably settled into these days. Occasional dabbles with pre-releases aside, it's basically nothing but cube.
What was your favorite pre-release you ever did?
Oh my gosh, favorite pre-release. I am someone who is loath to use superlatives in most ways, so the idea of a favorite pre-release is hard for me, but some of my favorites are the very first one I did was, I believe, Gate Crash. Did horribly, and that was great.
Is that one of the ones that you got like a box? You could like pick what guild you wanted?
You did get to pick what guilds you wanted. I didn't know what any of the guilds were, so I got whichever one in that set was the one that people had decided in advance was probably worst. I don't remember what that was because I didn't even know why it mattered what guild I chose because I was basically learning. It was my first limited experience ever. That was fun. I did poorly. I hated at the time, but loved in retrospect the Hour of Devastation pre-release because that's while I was living in England and it was in this like horrible, dark, sticky tabled bar. I didn't have sleeves or anything. I got beat in one game by someone who had an Invocation Force of Will and also Invocation Scarab God.
Oh my gosh.
I think it was both of those. Maybe that was across two different pre-release events. But anyway, at the time I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. But in retrospect, I was like, and that's a good thing. You know, sometimes pre-release should be a little bit wacky.
Maybe I was the one who beat you because I did open a Invocation Force of Will. That's the best card I've ever opened in my life.
Were you living in England at the time?
I was in Connecticut. Does that count?
Yeah, astral project to absolutely stomp my face at the Hour of Devastation pre-release.
Yes. And how did you find Cube?
I found Cube in college, the summer between my first 2 years of college. I was at home and I hadn't really brought any Magic cards to college when I first moved there because I thought, I don't know, maybe I like Magic, but there's probably a lot of people who think they're too cool for it now and, won't play it in college. And no, college is full of nerds as long as you look for them. And people were wanting to play even more Magic. And
who wants
my
to
friend
study?
Group, yeah. Or, have an excuse to have a reward afterwards or procrastinate.
That's a more healthy way to look at it.
yeah, maybe. But my friend group had started the tabletop board gaming club at that college. So I was just thinking, how do I find a way to let people play Magic without it being awful Commander where the power level is crazy? And I won't talk too poorly on Commander here because I have to keep my keep my words limited. But I basically started coming up with the idea of putting cards in a box that people could play with pre-release style. And over that summer, while I tried to do that at my parents' house, just by like putting together the piles of cards that I had, I found Cube Tutor online and realized that there was a community of people already doing that. And the bug bit. The first cube that I put together was the very, 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 very early version of the tabletop cube because it was for the tabletop board gaming club at my college and never went back. That cube started at, 720, large enough to do sealed with 8 people because I was still thinking of it as a like one-off pre-release environment more than a draft environment because I'd never drafted when I first built the cube.
Pre-release is what you knew. Makes sense.
Exactly.
Very cool. And what are some of your hobbies outside of Magic and Cube?
I love basically any artistic, creative pursuits. So lots of music, cooking, art, and also any excuse to like get in water. So swimming, paddleboarding, if I can find a friend that has one, since I don't, sitting in rivers, that sort of thing.
I recently was in Florida like in December, and my uncle taught me that I was swimming very poorly. I like barely knew how to swim apparently. So it was a revelation.
Was this like a lifeguard saying you're going to die? Or was this like the vintage cube drafter who's like, well, you're drafting wrong?
It was more the second. I could swim.
Yeah.
I'm not going to drown. I was
Yeah.
just very poor.
Yeah. Hey, that's allowed.
And you're also the organizer of the Inland Northwest Cube Fest. Tell us about that.
Correct. I have organized and run every single one of those events because there has only been one so far. The inaugural one was last year, 2025, in the summer. This year, those who are listening here get the sneak peek that this year Inland Northwest Cube Fest will be on October 10th and 11th, still in Spokane, Washington, which is where I hosted the previous one. It is a small local cube event with emphasis on all four of those words. It's smaller than a lot of even the small local ones. Last year, we didn't even quite get to 64 players, which I loved. You got to know basically everybody at the event by the end of it, which was very fun. Very much a local event. I host it in a multi-use building that has a game store on the top floor, but where we use the whole building, which includes a like common area with a coffee shop and a restaurant and a bar in the lower area. So it's a very, very fun, casual, friendly, not particularly competitive, but very creative event.
That's awesome. I mean, at time of this episode coming out, Kinetic Cube probably will be like a month or so in the past. So me in the future, I hope Kinetic Cube went well, but it's fun to do these events, and I hope to continue to host more of them. It's something that I've wanted to do for a while, and I'm inspired by you and other people who host cube events. I think it's cool.
I wish I could say that it's easy and not a lot of work and everybody should do it. That would be lying through my teeth. It's a lot of work, I will admit. The way that I ran my event is slightly less work than some people's events on the like practical side of running things, and slightly more work than most people's events in terms of me as an individual trying to ensure that the vibes are right, because my event was not very competitive. So there's a whole aspect of the making sure that people paid real US dollars for a ticket feel like they're having a fun time. And, you know, there's always those people who use the term return on investment in their engagement with competitions, which is anathema to me when it comes to Cube, but I know that's a real thing out there. So I got to ignore a lot of that side of the events, but you know, spent a very long time sweating over which exact cubes I'd be including and how the like structure of the event would be. And, you know, I'm always happy in the MTG Cube Talks Discord when people ping me to answer any questions that they might have about organizing their own events.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, reach out to Jane. I guess me. I'm not an expert at all, but
oh yeah, if you're listening to Cuberviews, you should reach out to its creator instead of me.
Today we are going to be talking about the ball pit, which is a cube that can only be played in a ball pit. Tell me about designing a cube that was meant to be played in a ball pit.
Yeah, legally speaking, if you're not surrounded by grubby plastic, you're not supposed to play it. You can. I won't send Pinkertons after you because I'm not a cop, but that is the vibe that it's intended for.
Yeah.
No, in all seriousness, I recommend that you play ball pit at a clean table where everybody has washed their hands and nobody's worried about like getting MRSA or anything like that from the grubbiness of it all. But it is a cube that I recommend people go into with the mindset that they are playing something that is kind of intended for children. You know, like Magic's a game. There are a lot of reasons why both adults should be playing games and why some games are more convoluted or complicated. I won't use the term highbrow here than other games, but the ball pit for me is kind of an attempt to take a way of playing Magic that's usually very intellectually intensive, like trying to draft cube well, and saying you can still do that, but it's gonna be goofy. It's not going to be silver bordered goofy. It's just going to be really, really weird and force you to think in ways you haven't done before. And that's kind of the design principle behind the whole concept of the ball pit.
Yeah, and the ball pit I find to be fascinating because it's a mix of three different rules changes to normal cube, which I think
Correct.
kind of blend together really well. The first one being a desert cube. And I've talked about many desert cubes on the podcast, and I think they're awesome. I've played many. I someday will build one of my own. I think they're really fun. The second one, every card can be played as a modal dual face card as a chromatic sphere optionally. And then the third one, players have to play every card that they draft. So it's 4 packs of 15. So it's actually additional cards. You build a 60 card deck. Tell me about how you came up with these three together. Which of these came first and how did the others come together?
Yeah. I've talked about this on other podcasts. If you want more in-depth versions of this specific story, you can go look up the Lucky Paper versions or the Recross the Path versions. But it's been a while since I've talked about it, and I can give you a more concise answer, which is for those three conceits, the chromatic spheres and the playing all of your lands came at the exact same time, because to me, they were the same rule break, almost. In that I'm someone who wants a cube to be easily explained. I want there to either be no rules modifications, have it just be the things that feel like rules modifications are baked in. For example, people always talk about 100 ornithopters. You draft it normally, you play it normally. It's just weird. When I was starting to build the cube that became Ball Pit, I wanted there to only be one modification, if there were any. And I decided on being able to cast every card as a chromatic sphere. And as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, and therefore also it just is a desert cube, because that doesn't matter nearly as much if you have fixing and if you can either dig for lands or cycle away your lands. And then right on the tail of that, as soon as that happened, I just said, oh, I've always wanted to have there be a cube that there was no deck building portion. If you look at all of the examples of gears that you can turn, knobs that you can twist in building a cube, there are some of them that you can't eliminate them, you know? Or if you do, you make it fundamentally different. You can eliminate the draft in a draft. That just makes it not a draft anymore. It's either sealed or pre-constructed decks. You could eliminate the gameplay of a draft and just have it be draft your decks and then draft again. And that's fun, but it's also not playing a game. And you also can't eliminate the deck building portion, because you'd have to get really lucky and only ever pick cards that worked in the deck you ended up with to have that work. So you also can't do that, except if something changes that. So as soon as I was like, chromatic spheres, okay, therefore also I can just run all the lands in there. It was also just an intuitive jump to me to say, I therefore also want people to not be able to make cuts. A lot of decisions happened after that, you know, because, for example, I could have made this a 360 card cube where you drafted 3 packs of 15 and the rules were all otherwise the same. And you'd end up with a 45 card deck. Other than that, it'd basically be the same. But I didn't do that for a few reasons. The main ones being, first of all, that makes it possible to deck somebody. And with 60 card decks, there's already games where people who are not doing anything mill related end up getting way closer to decking themselves than they would think they would, because they're just churning through enough cycled cards. Because as the game goes on, you're cycling more cards and you are able to more quickly decide which cards you just do not matter to your current game state, and you can just get rid of them. So 45 cards was too few because of that element. And the other element is just there are so many cool Magic cards out there in a format that lets me run a few kind of stinky cards that don't get played in many places because they can just get cycled. And also in a format that lets me run a few kind of broken cards because there's removal for them, and also it's a ball pit. There can be some funny things that you find in there.
Could be a snake in there.
Yeah, there could be a snake in there. Yeah, there could be like a severed human head, and you won't know until you get in there.
Yeah.
In all of those situations, 60 card decks helped because it makes it less likely that you will, within the first few turns of the game, either draw your really powerful outlier or your card that is kind of in there 75% just because of the vibe. And 60 cards kind of smooths that out.
Yeah, I mean, I find having to play every card to be such an interesting part of this cube, because I built many cubes, you built multiple cubes, and I mean, you built, like we talked about, the tabletop cube, which is, I would say, legacy cube-esque. And when you're building a cube of that power level, you have to kind of play within a power band, or cards will just kind of end up in sideboards, or players will avoid playing some cards. Because if you draft 45, you have to pick 23 non-lands, maybe you draft a few non-basics. That's like
Hmm.
15, maybe 20 cards getting cut from your deck. And then that kind of really can be restricting about how people build a cube. And when you force players to play all their cards, it kind of opens up everything because now you can't cut cards. And so if I put in some insane card, like let me look at the list here, like what's the first crazy card I see here? If I put in Yuki Onna, which is a card I've never seen, a 3 and a red, when it comes to play, destroy target artifact. And when you play Spirit Arcane spell, you return Yuki Onna to its owner's hand. In the ball pit, if that was in there, that would probably just ride sideboards all the time. But here, players don't have an option. So I think that's really cool.
I love that you chose Yuki Onna because Yuki Onna is secretly like super cracked
Oh,
in
okay.
this cube. And the example for me that's more common is one of the like worst cards in the cube is Sponsire of Ulamog. It's a 10 mana 7/11. And it's a big Eldrazi. It's not even an artifact. There are less ways to get it out sneakily than there are other things. Most of the time, you draw it and you're like, that's a sick card. And then you just cycle it as a sphere. And yeah, you have to run it if you draft it. The example that most cube players and designers will know and think is hilarious is just Cogwork Librarian.
I love
Cogwork
card.
Librarian is a great card. You use it in the draft, and then you say, oh God, and you don't run it in your deck most of the time.
In
People
this
have
cube,
made,
it's like hot potato. It's like who ends up
well,
with it? Like throwing it
yeah,
around.
because at the end of the draft, whoever ends up with the Cogwork Librarian is forced to run it in their deck, and that's first of all hilarious. But second of all, there are a non-zero number of games, although relatively small, where you just need to cast a 4 mana 3/3, and it ends up on the battlefield. And
Yeah.
it doesn't end up on the battlefield because I intentionally made a peasant pauper cube that's power level is so low that a 4 mana 3/3 is good. It only ends up in play because it's a bad card, but sometimes a bad card that is still a creature is better than getting rid of it in hope that you get a better creature.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned Sponsire Ulamog because one of the first decks that I ever had when I was a kid, and I still have it like in a box somewhere, I must
Ooh.
have been like 12, was I had, I think, a Jund Eldrazi spawn deck that would play all these like 5 mana, like 2/2s that made Eldrazi
Yeah.
spawn. And I always wanted Sponsire of Ulamog, but it was like expensive for some reason when I was a kid. And I was like, oh,
Oh yeah, back in the day it was.
this card's great. It would have been the best card
Yeah.
in the deck. I mean, it's 4 mana, make 2 Eldrazi spawns. How do you lose with that?
It's an infinite mana sink, and all it costs is that you have to have 10 mana already and then infinite mana.
And then 20 mana, cast
Yeah.
any number of Eldrazi's from outside the game, which in this cube does nothing as you have no sideboard. That's so
Well,
broken.
in this cube, the owner is cool. So if you manage to
Oh,
activate it for 20 mana, you can just do it the way it's meant to be done, which is if
pull
you
out the
have any
trade binder.
Eldrazi with you, if you can find them, if you can go buy one from the game store owner, you can just put it onto the battlefield. I've never had somebody activate that ability yet. That's one of the only cutesy things possible in this cube that someone has not done yet. I've actually been blown away by just how much people have chased the fun in this cube in the way that I wanted them to and tried to do the wacky thing and then done it.
Well, if I get a chance, I'm taking that card 100%.
Yeah, the next time that Ian Braverman loses spectacularly at this cube, it will be because I gassed him up on the fun side of it.
Absolutely. And another part of this cube I think is super interesting also when it comes to like gameplay and like thinking about how the cube works to me is like we said that every card can be played as a chromatic sphere. And chromatic sphere, if people don't know, it's a 1 mana artifact. You can pay 1 and sacrifice it to draw a card and add a mana and every color to your mana pool. So that card, while it does cycle itself what's on the battlefield, it does cost 1 to play. So
Mm-hmm.
when you play the chromatic spheres, you're falling behind in tempo, even if it's just by 1 turn. And we'll get into it more later. There's also an artifact theme in the cube, so there are other reasons you might want a chromatic sphere on the battlefield. But tell me about the gameplay of this cube more when it comes to chromatic spheres. Do people try and not play them if they don't have to because of the tempo loss? Or would players play a bunch of them all in one turn and then all of them use them all at once so they don't get as behind? I'm really interested to hear how that goes.
I will first give the player experience, which is that players act wildly different with respect to how you are supposed to use chromatic spheres. There are people who try to build decks and then try to play their decks where when you cast a chromatic sphere, you are casting it at the time and for the reason that you would normally cast a chromatic sphere, which is either you have the spare mana and it helps you dig a little bit, or you need the fixing, or you have nothing better to do. There are also people who say, this is the chromatic sphere cube, blanket we ball, and then they play as many cards as they can as chromatic spheres. Technically, the time traveling supercomputer would say that neither of those approaches is the best way to play. The best way is both in between those two extremes and also varies a fair bit based on the deck that you built. For example, there are decks that are built around either getting cards into the graveyard and getting them back onto the battlefield directly. There's only a few ways to do that, but they're very powerful when you get them to work. Those decks dig. You want to be digging constantly. What matters most is getting a combination of cards that are not technically a combo. It's not deterministic, but that will be very powerful. And in that case, you're losing tempo to gain tempo, and it balances out in a powerful way. Conversely, there are decks in this cube that are, for lack of a better word, aggro decks or stompy decks. They often do have like red and green cards fairly heavily, but they don't have to be stuck in a specific color. The beauty of this cube, or the horrible thing about it, if you're somebody who wants the color pie to exist in every single format that you play, is that you can have a red-green stompy deck that just randomly casts a 2 black pip removal spell, because that's a thing you can do when you have chromatic spheres. And those decks will often still not actually have that many weird splashy pips that they're going for, because the faster the deck in this cube, the less it wants to be playing a bunch of chromatic spheres. You want to be using your mana to hit face as much as possible instead of to dig. I've done a pretty good job, but I'm always tuning it to try to make both of those types of decks work. For example, this is a deck that has power outliers in it. Not like a single card win the game outlier, but a single card, you should answer that as quickly as possible or it's going to hurt. Decks that don't use the chromatic spheres the way that they're intended to be, who don't try to dig a fair bit, will sometimes, as a direct result of that, be playing with slightly lower power cards than the person who digs until they hit that power outlier. Conversely, I've tried to tune those power outliers such that it's not always the best thing to do to just dig until you hit one of those. I won't tell the story here because I've told it too many times before, but there at one point in the past has been a too powerful Cloud Post deck that could just make enough mana that it could always just dig for the best things in the deck. And that got tuned out because it was too good. There isn't a correct way to play. However, I will say the people who have the most fun tend to be leaning heavily into using the chromatic spheres as intended and digging until they find cards that are either really fun or really good for the board state.
From a spiky perspective, there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with the chromatic sphere. Like you mentioned, one, you can use it to get the Sponsire of Ulamog into play for 1 mana, sacrifice it, and then play some sort of reanimation effect. Or you could, like I've done with MDFCs, which one of my favorite things to do in Cube is play something like a Witch Enchanter as a land, and then use something like a Ghostly Flicker to blink the land, and then it comes back into play. How much have you built into that space of using them as like a cheaty kind of way, or is that like not in the spirit of the cube?
It's mostly not in the spirit of the cube. I don't want this to be a goofy artifact combo environment because it didn't need to be, not that there has to only be one cube in any specific archetype, but a lot of people who like this cube, for example, like the 100 Ornithopters cube. And that's a combo-centric environment. Every single deck, every single game either involves combo or has to play with the knowledge that a combo could happen. I wanted to go for something goofy. There are so many cards in this cube that would just be utterly irrelevant in the face of combo being possible.
And one reanimate off of a chromatic sphere or something.
Exactly, yeah. And there are still a very small number of ways that you can, for example, reanimate spells. I change the list fairly frequently. To my knowledge, there's currently only one way that you can fairly riskily do the flicker thing. There's a card called Synod Sanctum. It's a 1 mana artifact. you can pay 2 mana and tap it to exile one of your own permanents. So in total, you've invested 3 mana so far to exile one of your own permanents. That sucks. You can also pay 2 mana without tapping and sacrifice this artifact to return to play all of the cards exiled with it. So if you have a lot of mana, you could, for example, 1 mana play a Sponsire Ulamog, 1 mana play a Metalwork Colossus, 1 mana play a Darksteel Colossus, all face down, all 10 or 11 cost creatures. They're just chromatic spheres. Then you could, play this Synod Sanctum, blink them all on 3 different turns, and then sacrifice it to get them all to the battlefield. That can be really powerful, That's the only way that I think is currently in here to flicker a sphere such that it ends up as the opposite side. And the only reasons I let that one stay in are, first of all, it's just a cool card. So few people have actually played with Synod Sanctum outside of either very specific decks or they happened to play limited or standard back when original Mirrodin was in play. And the other reason is just it's a very powerful card. It's also way more risky than a lot of people realize. First of all, you're committing a card to the battlefield that's only an enabler. It doesn't do anything on its own, really. You can tap 2 and exile one of your chromatic spheres that you want to get back onto the battlefield, and then have them just instant speed removal the Synod Sanctum. And sacrificing it in response does nothing, because just like I think is Banisher Priest, the way that the original text
it would just be exiled forever.
It just stays exiled. So you've used 2 cards, a fair bit of mana, and just gotten blown out. So, it can be a powerful card, but it's risky. And almost every single card in this cube that lets you cheat on mana like that has the built-in understanding that it's probably going to be risky. Most of the power outlier big guys in the cube don't produce a ton of ETB value, for example. So the only alpha card I own is an alpha disenchant, which is in this cube. And you could just have your big guy disenchanted. You spend all this stuff for, and there's just a 2 mana instant speed removal spell that gets rid of the artifact. That is by design.
It's also really interesting how this cube is basically also secretly an artifact cube. I mean, looking at the dispersion, sure, it's definitely a desert cube. There's 192 lands in the cube and 150 colorless cards. So that is a big percentage of the cube being colorless, and only 25 of each colored card outside of multicolor. So how often do you actually need the chromatic spheres to produce mana for you? Because I could definitely see a deck that you just take colorless cards, artifacts, and go all in on that. Then there's additional synergies for the chromatic spheres being artifacts. Like, for example, one big part of this cube is there are a lot of Mirror Enforcers, which is a 7 mana 4/4 affinity, is one of the best decks in the cube to literally just spam artifacts and just not care about color at all.
One of my favorite things about this cube is that people will look at it and they'll be like, oh, it's the chromatic sphere cube. It's full of all these cool artifacts. This is an artifact cube. Exactly what you just said. And then they'll sit down and play and they'll go, oh no. There's a reason that you need colored mana in this cube. And one of the biggest examples is that they'll spend a bunch of turns and time and mana playing chromatic spheres and getting out Mirror Enforcers and trying to do the artifact thing. And every single one of their opponent's removal spells is just a 1-for-1 trade with whatever the big thing is that they've worked for. And then their opponent casts Deadbridge Goliath, which is 2 green for a 5/5. It's a 4 mana 5/5. It's an insect. It's just a little guy. It's not an artifact. It's just a vanilla creature, basically, that is 5/5 for 4. 2 green is a lot in this cube. And a lot of people will see a card like that and go, I don't know. I want to do the artifact thing. And then they'll realize that they're staring down a 5/5 with a bunch of 4/4s from their Mirror Enforcers. And most of their removal spells straight up cannot even target Deadbridge Goliath because it's not an artifact or an enchantment. And that is a very necessary thing to think through, or a learning experience to have with this cube. One of the things that makes the non-artifact creatures so strong is that they're non-artifact creatures. A lot of the interaction in this cube is built around the concept of an artifact being a thing that is destructible. For example, green famously has a lot of artifact and enchantment removal. Those are all really good spells in this cube. Some of them are power outliers simply because they're a high rate removal spell. And it feels really bad when you have only leaned into the colorless cards because you just don't want to have to worry about color. And then suddenly realize that because you weren't worrying about color, you now have to worry about removal being vastly more effective against you.
So because you have to pay one to get the sphere into play and then pay mana to generate the mana off of it, did you purposely make the colored cards more powerful because it takes more of an investment to get them into play compared to colorless cards? Especially because another big part of this cube is a desert cube. There are a lot of lands in this cube that do not produce colored mana. Really, the vast majority. Like there's a ton of Zalviran Voids in the cube, which is a land that enters and scries one, only makes colorless. Really, there's only maybe like 30 lands that even make colored mana. It's a lot easier to get the colorless.
It's so much easier to get colorless. And the lands that produce colored mana in this cube should be very high pick priorities most of the time. Not across the board, but most of the time, those should be very high priorities because, yes, getting colored mana is hard in this cube. It's not universally this way, but some cards essentially cost one more generic mana for each colored pip in their casting cost, just where you can spread that extra mana that you have to pay out across previous turns. Like Renata, Called to the Hunt, 2 generic mana, 2 green mana. Most of the time that this card is played, if it's played on turn 4, it's because 2 chromatic spheres that were played in the first 3 turns of the game are used to cast this creature. That fundamental built-in way that this cube works changes everything about the gameplay. Because to answer your question, yes, I, in some ways, let colored cards be stronger than colorless cards. Not across the board. There are power outliers everywhere. I spread the love around in that way. But generically speaking, the extra cost of a card requiring colored mana lets me make that card stronger. One of the perfect examples of that is the card Gigantosaurus. This is a 5 mana 10/10. It's not an artifact. A 5 mana 10/10 that's not an artifact in this cube is bonkers because there isn't that much removal that hits it directly. So most of the time when you're killing it, it's either using one of your best removal spells or, more likely, you're having to trade like 2 out of your 3 Mirror Enforcers to block it. The downside being, it's not just 5 generic mana. It's a green creature. I've seen people cast this card off of 5 chromatic spheres before because, it's still 5 mana. In the first 4 turns of the game, they have cast a few chromatic spheres. And then on turn 5, after having, cast some colorless spells as well, they just crack all of their spheres and play Gigantosaurus. The other fun element of that is that with those cards being strong cards, the ones that require a fair bit of colored mana, there's this thing that happens in a lot of limited that I've experienced with good players, which is not always casting your bombs until you have either protection for that bomb or at least a way to profit off of it, even if it gets destroyed. And, that requires like stacking a hand such that you wait to cast a creature that you need to live in order to win the game until you have a way to, keep it around for a little bit. And in this cube, that's harder to do because you have to be putting a lot of cards face down to schematic spheres in order to be able to cast those bombs. And then also there's this super fun thing that happens, which is that usually when you cast a really powerful colored spell, your hand just entirely changes as soon as you cast it because you've suddenly drawn 3 more cards to replace the ones that you used for the mana to cast it. And then you suddenly have to decide what your next turn's gameplay is going to be after you've already cast it. That's more a thing that happens post-casting it than before casting it, the way it is in some other formats. And that's just a really fun paradigm shift that I like watching people experience for the first time and going, oh, okay. I see how this goes. And basically everyone has a moment playing this cube where they say, I get it now. And that doesn't mean that they're saying they know how to play well. It just means they go, oh, I understand the conceit of this cube now. It feels natural to me the way that the chromatic spheres work in this cube. And now that's like locked in. One of the best things that anyone has ever told me after having drafted this cube was last year in the Northwest Cube Fest. After the first day of drafting, someone came up to me on the second day and said they'd played the cube in the main event and then they'd gone and they'd just played Commander with their friends in the hotel room. And they'd found themselves trying to play cards face down as chromatic spheres in their Commander game because it had locked into them why that works, why it's good when you would do it. And it was just natural. The negative of that is I'm basically saying there's a thing central to this cube that the average Magic player doesn't have baked in. And that's hard for some people. It's a new thing you have to think about. That can be a mental load. That can make it more thought intensive to draft than some other environments. But as long as the people going into the cube are assuming that it's a little bit wacky, that becomes mostly a positive and not very much a negative.
The Gigantosaurus is really interesting because you have to take so much setup to even play it. It takes 5 chromatic spheres, let's say. So you would have to maybe take turn 1 off, turn 2 off, part of turn 3 off, not playing anything else, saving all your mana, putting all of your cards from your hand onto the battlefield as chromatic spheres. So by the time you play the Gigantosaurus, you probably only have maybe 1 card in hand along with lands. And then, like you were just saying, I didn't even think about that part, that you crack it for green, you draw something else. You crack it for green, you draw something else. And then you're getting all this, oh my gosh, wait, do I even play the Gigantosaurus? But then now that I've cracked the chromatic spheres, I won't have a chance to play it in the future again without taking a huge other tempo loss on another one of my turns later on. That's really interesting.
It's a lot of thought over a vanilla creature that most people would only play if they were drafting a mono green deck and it was like pack 2 or 3 and they saw it going around. And it's also just literally a big dinosaur that's called Gigantosaurus.
Big boy.
And each tooth is the length of a horse and new ones grow every 16 days. Let's get a closer look. That's the flavor text. And this is a goofy cube. I love people being able to look at this card in a pack and their brain just kind of turns off for a second because it immediately asks them 4 questions that they weren't prepared for their brain to have asked them. It goes, why is this here? This is a dinosaur. It's not an artifact. Does this have something to do with a ball pit? There are a lot of fun like references in this cube. Is there like secretly a sphere in the image? No, it's just a dinosaur.
This thing wouldn't fit in the ball pit. It's too big.
Like I'm not in green, so I can't. Oh God, I'm not in any colors. Or wait, no, I'm in every color. Okay. Oh, if I pick it, I have to run it. There's so many thoughts that go on. And sometimes people look at that card, and the beauty of this cube is they can just say, I'm not interested. Someone else can be a Gigantosaurus player at this table, and it's just not going to be me. And they go for whatever it else is that sparks their interest in that pick.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I don't know if I would take a Gigantosaurus, but I would be happy to see it on the field, and I will capsize it and feel really good.
Yeah.
So do players usually end up quote unquote 5 colors, or is it smarter to play 1 or 2? So like we were talking about, when you're cracking them, when you draw something else off of a sphere, have more options. Because if you already commit to blue when you draw the card and you draw a green card, you can't cast unless you have another sphere. How many colors does it make sense to play in this cube?
It largely depends on your game plan, and your game plan will change a few times as you are drafting. I will say very, very generically, it is often a smart decision for a lot of drafters to lean into 2 colors and then just simply not care how many cards they're splashing. Because if you manage to draft a few of the lands that can give you, 1 or 2 colors, then it is smart to lean into that color. You don't really need to lean into a color unless one of 2 things happens. One is there is a very specific archetype that only exists in that color. That's not very common in this cube. Most of the archetypes are not color archetypes. They're very, very generic baked-in archetypes like control, or they are intentionally broad archetypes like splicers. The splicer deck is decently strong in this cube, where you play non-artifact creatures that when they ETB give you a 3/3 golem, and then as long as that splicer's on the battlefield, it buffs all of your golems. I think right now it's technically only a 4-color deck, but it's functionally 5 colors because there are cards in every color that benefit those golems. Even then, you're usually not leaning into a color. The lands that give you colored mana, that is what makes it most appealing to lean into colors, because then it's kind of just saying those creatures cost less because you have the mana already available. And the decks that are able to cast the most spells early on that are not chromatic spheres are the ones that prioritized colored lands. And if you can take advantage of having out early creatures, for example, then you will have gotten the payoff. congratulations. I always want to reward people for playing proactively. But, other than that, it's not necessarily a smart thing to try to pigeonhole yourself into colors, because if your game plan is more, I want to be kind of 50-50 reactive as well, I want to keep a non-zero number of spheres on the battlefield most of the time so that I can cast my good removal spells that cost colored mana, then you don't really want to pigeonhole yourself into colors, because you don't need to. If you're already going to be forcing yourself to have some investment into spheres on the battlefield for reaction, you can just use those on your turn for the proactive plays. And yes, you are taking a little bit of a tempo hit, but at a vast payoff of having a flexible deck. So the short answer is it still depends. Colored mana good, everything else depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, I feel like so much of this cube revolves around tempo. It's very interesting. The tempo of actually playing the spheres. Huh. And one other question I have for you is, it's a 60 card deck. And like we talked about, there are a lot of stinkers and then there are some bombs in here. So,
oh yeah,
how much of the decks, like we talked about, is the game plan to kind of just keep cycling until you hit one of your big bombs? And is that an effective strategy, or will you just lose to, oh, I got some stuff out?
Yeah. I would say that I'm not, the best Magic player out there. I am very, very grateful that I have had some of the best Magic players out there play this cube. And they have told me that they're not entirely sure what their best option is. And to me, for this cube, that's a huge compliment, because other than the few things that I have tuned out, like the too many cloud posts in the first versions of it, both have their risks, and they're relatively equal risks. It's very appealing to dig for your power outliers, and more specifically than that, to dig for your cards that just do really well together. To dig for your Furnace Celebration, which rewards you for sacrificing artifacts, and your Death of a Thousand Stings, which rewards you for getting it into the graveyard. Because Furnace Celebration is okay on its own. Death of a Thousand Stings is pretty bad on its own. But together, that is a clock. A slow clock, but a clock nonetheless. Digging for those is powerful if you have both of them in your deck, but also that's a slow thing to work towards, and it's most effective if you also managed to get out something that keeps you alive. That's the only advice I can really give you as a drafter of this cube, is you need to know that both options are viable, so that when you open a pack and you see very, very vaguely two possible game plans in front of you, one where you're digging constantly and one where you're committing to the board, you have to know both of those are possible. Otherwise, the cube just doesn't work. Otherwise, everyone is playing the long game or everybody's playing the short game. And I will say that the thing I am most trying to fix/keep in check with this cube is I still want there to be things that end games. I'm not someone who wants flat power level all the time, obviously. If you just look at this list, you'll be like, dear sweet Jesus, this person does not does not care if there is one card that is objectively better than one other card in the cube, because that's true in this cube. But I also don't want the long game and the short game being so equal that just every single game is either decided instantly or grinds on forever. Thankfully, it's managed to end up in a spot I'm happy with. I can say both strategies are viable, but it does mean that your decisions always matter when you're drafting, because even down to the last pick of pack 4, the 60th card you draft in this cube has to end up in your deck. So you're always going to end up with a few cards you don't really have choice over whether they make it into your deck. That does not fundamentally change your game plan, because you are always going to cast some chromatic spheres. And that honestly just makes your decision making easier while you are playing. Because if you draw one of those cards you didn't really want, you just know that you're going to play it as a chromatic sphere instead of the card that might be lower down on your priority list, but is one you intentionally chose for your deck.
Yeah. Another really interesting part of this cube that I was reading about on the outline was your philosophy when it comes to updating it. I feel like in my mind, one of the really interesting parts of this cube, like we were just talking about, is kind of the rough edges, like there are the power outliers, some of the weaker cards that are just kind of cool. There are the swaggy fun cards, the bombs. Are you avoiding over-tuning this cube to kind of lose some of its charm? Or do you regularly cut power outliers or weaker cards or keep them in because it's just cool?
I think in the primer, I say that I'm not interested in tuning it towards any specific point or goal. I'm not sure of the exact wording, but I tune this cube more than people think I do until they play it, in that I'm essentially tuning it specifically so that there are power outliers. In that a lot of people think of tuning, for example, like their clone of the MTGO vintage cube, except it's missing the 10% most expensive cards and it has their 10% pet cards in it. That cube, tabletop cube, in some ways. People think about tuning those cubes as keeping things at that status quo, where if there is an archetype, it's viable. And if a thing is viable, it's relatively equally viable. That isn't nearly as important in a cube where the archetypes matter less than what you do with them. It's more about, like you said, individual power outliers. The two sides of why I let there still be a decent number of those in here are, first of all, everybody's going to end up with some power outliers because you don't have the thing that happens in some other cubes happen, where in pack 3, one person realizes that they've passed 3 blue mythics and that someone on their left just is the blue deck that now has all of the blue mythics in the cube. Because in the ball pit, most likely, one of those people to their right will have already taken it, because it doesn't matter that it is a blue mythic.
Yeah, it doesn't matter
that it's just a powerful card. It still matters what it does. For example, Filigree Vector is a powerful card in this cube because it puts 1/1 counters on your pre-existing creatures and then lets you slowly proliferate. So you can take a large board of small creatures and go absolutely nuts. And it's white, as makes sense for that game plan. That card is a bomb in some decks, and it's literally like useless in a decent number of other decks. Because if you're, for example, building a mostly controlling deck that is trying to either win with, for example, the Furnace Celebration and Death of a Thousand Stings thing, you don't have a bunch of creatures out. This is a 4-mana 2/2, essentially a 5-mana 2/2 because you need the extra colored mana. And if you don't already have a bunch of creatures out, it's not very good. In a different side of that, I keep in Traxos for now. Traxos is a 4-mana 7/7 with trample. It has other stuff on it that isn't very important in this cube. It's mostly just a really big, really dumb idiot that comes down early and deals 1 to 7 damage depending on blockers before it eats a removal spell or something like that. Both of those are cards that are powerful in different ways, but that are power outliers in certain decks. And I want every deck to be able to have some things that when it draws them, it changes the pace of the game. And once in a blue moon, that means that somebody does get blown out quicker than they thought they should have been able to be blown out, because the card quality between the cards drawn was just relatively different. This is the game Magic the Gathering that is fundamentally built around people getting lucky and unlucky in what they draw. Yes, there's so much skill expression in here as well, but I really like reminding people that even in an environment where you are highly, highly rewarded for deciding on a really interesting trail through the complexity, that you can still fail to draw your best cards and you can still have your opponent draw their best cards. To me, that's what learning to play Magic has, that a lot of people don't get to experience once they've been playing Magic for a bunch of years and playing flat power level cubes, is it loses some of its luster. They'll draw cards that are decent most of the time. That's what they do when they play Magic. And that might be healthier for everyday play, but sometimes you want that little bit of an exception. Sometimes you want the opportunity of playing something flashy and fun.
Yeah, I think I'm starting to realize I'm starting to understand now that this cube isn't really as much about what colors you're in, but just managing the amount of colored pips in general that you have. That's really interesting, to avoid having too many colored pips, as long as that's interesting. Huh.
And I think in the primer, I say the color of your pips matters less than the number of your pips. Yeah. And as a very general rule of thumb, that's still pretty true, even though I wrote that for an earlier version of this cube.
And I have another cube that I've been working on that I think is very silly, called Say Less, where all the cards have to have 10 words or less on them. And
I love those cubes.
That cube, I've really kind of just accepted that there's going to be some bad cards and some really good cards. When we played it a couple times, you draw some cards and you're like, wow, this card is terrible. And everyone at the table just laughs and it's hilarious. And then someone else plays Gristlebrand and it's great. So, I love that. I've been wanting to explore that space even more. And I love it. So how about we jump into a pack one pick one here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, I'll read off the pack. We have Zalvrin Void, which is a land that when it enters, you scry one, taps for colorless. There's a lot of those in the cube. There's Conclave Mentor, green and white, 2/2. If one or more 1/1 counters have been put on a creature you control, that many plus one are put on instead. And when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. There's God Pharaoh Statue, 7 colorless. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may exile a creature from your graveyard. And if you do, you create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 and it gains haste. Then there's Palladium Mirror, 3 mana, 2/2, Mirror, that taps to add 2. Nesting Grounds, which is a land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 1 and move a counter from target permanent you control onto another target permanent. That card's really fun. I have that in Proliferate Cube. Then we have Drownyard Temple. I saw these and I thought it was so sick. It's a land.
So I'm adding even more. Every time I update it, I add a few more.
Oh, it's sick. It's one of my favorite things. Taps are colorless, and you can pay 3 and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So that really goes along with the whole theme of what we were talking about of like, how can you use these purposely putting them to the graveyard? I think that's sweet. Then there's Aetheric Amplifier, 3 colorless artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of a color, or you can pay 4, tap it, choose 1 as a sorcery, double the number of each kind of counter on target permanent, or double the number of each kind of counter you have. Tel'Gelad Stylus, 1 or green instant, destroy target artifacts. Scry 2. Another Zephyr Void, Synod Sanctum that we talked about, the one that lets you remove permanents you control from the game and then sack it to return those to play. I have a Trinket Cube, which is all about 1 and 0 mana artifacts. And when I saw this, I was like, I want to try this card. This card's really interesting.
I 5-second aside, one of the reasons I let it stay in here is to show cube designers that it exists, because it's a little bit cracked in this cube, but it's just a fun card in a lot of lower power cubes.
Oh, I saw it and I was immediately like, wow, this is really cool. Then we have Urza's Power Plant, land that taps for 1 colorless mana. But if you have it, Urza's Mine, Tower, and Power Plant in play, then you add 2 colorless mana instead. Then there's Blinkmoth Well. This is really another funny one that I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this. It's a land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap a non-creature artifact. So it's a tapper. Then we have Spawnsire of Ulamog, the card that we're talking about, my favorite card. 10 mana, 7/11, Annihilator 1. You can pay 4 and create 2 0/1 Eldrazi spawns that tap for colorless, or you can pay 20 and cast any number of Eldrazi's you own from outside the game for free. It's so good. And then we have Extinguish Your Battleship, 8 colorless. When it enters, destroy target non-creature permanent. Then the Spacecraft deals 4 damage to each creature and has station, and then it becomes a flying trample 10/10 once you put 5 station counters on it. And then lastly, Mirren the Mourning Well, which is a legendary land that you can tap to add a colorless, or 3 and tap it, sacrifice a creature, you gain life equals the sacrifice creature's toughness. Yeah, like we were talking about, none of the lands in this pack tap for any color of mana. So that's really interesting, even though there are a lot of lands. Yeah.
Also, every single card you're looking at here is going to be in somebody's main board.
Yeah, I'm going to be forced to play these cards. What do you think of this pack? I know we were talking beforehand that it was like, there's no fetch in the queue, but it didn't feel like there was any like, all right, of course you take this.
I think this is actually a very good pack for a pack one pick one. I don't know how much you curated it, but I do think this is a good one. How much do you want to know my thoughts on it before I hear your thoughts, since you're the fresh brain?
I guess I'll go.
Yeah, then I can dunk on you by saying that there are no correct answers.
Let me think here. So Palladium Mirror shouts out to me as really strong because it's 3 mana colorless, so you don't have to use any of your chromatic spheres. And then it taps for 2 colorless. You can use it to play and then immediately sack spheres, or play 2 in 1 turn. There's a lot of ramp, so you can get towards some of your bigger plays, use a lot of your spheres all in 1 turn to cast your Gigantosaurus. So that card does seem pretty strong to me. Another one that I like, Aetheric Amplifier. This one I have in my Proliferate Cube, and I think it's been really fun. I mean, it's a manalith, that's decent. And then you can do some weird counter stuff. Like, screw it, you could double the number of station counters on your Extinguisher Battleship. Like, why not? So those two really shout out to me as being pretty strong, but also Telegelad's Justice, I would consider just being a good removal spell in this cube. I'm not sure how highly I should take lands, so that I don't know.
This is why I wanted to hear your thoughts first, because I love both of those cards, and there are 3 cards that I would personally take above those.
Okay.
The first thing I want to reinforce is what I just said. There isn't a correct answer. It's more about what am I hoping to open? What am I hoping to lean into? Both of the cards that you pointed out are mana ramp, and there's not a lot of mana ramp in this cube. Most of the mana ramp in this cube is the really slow thing that is Drownyard Temple, which just lets you over time spend like 4 mana to get 1 extra colorless mana out, which is really good, but it's slow. There's, some decks that want that, some that don't. Both Palladium Mirror and Etheric Amplifier are good at getting your strong things out, but also have the difficult payback that they are not good on their own. You're talking about tempo. This is a cube where tempo matters, but this is also a cube where the number of cards you have matters. And Etheric Amplifier and Palladium Mirror both say you will get your good stuff out faster, and you will probably end up with 1 less good thing out. Since instead of playing one of those cards, you're playing the card that gets you other cards. So both of those, they help you get a little bit more consistent in your mana or your ability to dig, or in this cube, both. However, the 3 cards that most call to me in this pack, in no particular order, are, first of all, Synod Sanctum, the one we've talked about before, because it is one of the risky, unfair things you can do. And pack one, pick one, in my opinion, this is actually a little bit controversial amongst good cube players. I am actually decently likely to pick the powerful enabler in a pack one, pick one, even if it's a little bit risky, because I like chasing that dream. I like trying to make the thing that people don't think is necessarily likely to happen. That's an option. Tel-Jallad Justice is just a powerful, efficient removal spell at instant speed, which in this cube, really, really good. And then finally, Extinguisher Battleship, the 8 mana spacecraft from Edge of Eternities that usually you're only going to get it out by casting it really late in the game or cheating it out. And then it does a bunch of damage when it enters. And then maybe you get it into a big creature.
That's a big ship.
It's a big ship. And it's only been in the cube for a little bit. So, that's the caveat. I have found it to be a really powerful card, actually, because if you really lean into that I want to cast big things mindset, not even necessarily because you're mana ramping, but just because you're playing cards that let you survive early, and then you're just getting 2 or 3 Drownyard Temples out over the course of the game, and then you cast it on turn 6 or something like that, it can just absolutely wreck face. The number 4 is very important in this cube for damage and stat lines because Mirror Enforcers are 4/4s.
Oh, yeah.
So you always have to play with the understanding that 4/4s will be on the battlefield at some point. So the fact that it hits Mirror Enforcers is powerful. Blowing up something that is not a creature is also really powerful. You can get rid of a enchantment or you can get rid of a land. That can be powerful. And then I have a non-zero number of times I actually just won a game by making this an enormous freaking creature and just hitting them in one go with it. It's huge. And it's not actually that hard to station. So those are the 3 cards that stand out the most to me. And right now, in the mentality that I'm in right now, I want to chase that splashy fun of Extinguisher Battleship. Yes, Tel-Jallad Justice is a much more consistently good card. It will always be good when you draw it. And Synod Sanctum is a much more high risk, this card might win me the game, more consistently card. But Extinguisher Battleship is just sick as hell. And also, if I take it and then I start seeing some of the only ways that you can cheat it out early, I'll know for sure I can lean heavily into that mentality of, cool, now I'm doing basically like the control deck thing. I'm only going to do things that either keep me alive or get me to that mentality. And it's really fun in this cube once you hit a point where you have settled on your lane, basically, because then you have so much more direction in what you actually need to do. And then you're just doing the fun, ooh, do I want to splash this? Because I could splash anything. And it's such a fun draft.
I think that I'm still on Palladium Mirror. It feels good to me. Because then I can get my Extinguisher Battleship out early. But
it's a good card.
I definitely see that I could be wrong. I could definitely.
It's also one of the only ways to just pop off with Mirror Superior, the 2 mana 5/6 that you can only cast off of creature mana. So it's a fun card. It usually goes pretty early in packs.
Or I can combo off with Mirror Galvanizer and go crazy.
Or you can just cast a bunch of balls and just, do whatever.
Or in the ball pit.
Yeah. The pit is your oyster.
So definitely let us know in the comments what you would take from this pack. I think it's a pretty interesting pack. And yeah, Jane, thank you so much for coming on. Anything you want to say here before we wrap up, or any big lessons or recommendations you would give to people from something you've learned from this cube?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, first of all. The lesson I would give for someone who has listened through this entire podcast of really wacky, crazy stuff is just that it's trite to say cube can be anything you want at this point, but it's not any less true. People, I think, in the community have been saying that for a number of years now. And one of the drawbacks of cube being whatever you want is that you will make a cube that is not for everybody else. You will make a cube that other drafters will look at and say, I just don't really want to play that. And I think more cube curators need to take the pros and the cons of that concept to heart, such that they can then have the freedom to make the cubes that are actually the ones they will enjoy the most. Because unless they accept that there will be people who literally just want to play the MTGO Vintage Cube. That's literally all they want to play.
There's one guy in my store that whenever we ask him a cube, he's like,
Yeah.
Is it the MTGO Vintage Cube? And we're like, no, it's a different Vintage Cube. He's like, oh. And we're like, okay.
And if you build a cube that is not the MTGO Vintage Cube, meaning if you build any cube, there will be people who just do not want to draft it. And you have to accept that if you ever want to just do the thing that is cube design. But once you've accepted that, there's a big weight taken off you. Because like the ball pit, yeah, it's successful now in the terms of if you define success as lots of people have played it or enjoyed it, sure, it's successful. But it was by no means guaranteed to be that way. It's a weird thing that a lot of people don't want to play. And somebody out there has to make the weird thing that puts off a lot of people in order for the weirdos who like that stuff to be able to play it. And very, very selfishly, I want people to be messing around with those weird things. I want people to try cubes that are just bad ideas. Because unless you do that, you won't realize that the thing everybody has been saying is a bad idea might sometimes be okay. You know, the ball pit's a bad idea in the sense that it fundamentally breaks some rules of Magic, and it's kind of really annoying to figure out how it works. And there's a lot of reason why I never judge a single person for saying, I don't want to play ball pit, because it's not for everybody. But I'm very happy that I made it, because now people enjoy it. I've made cubes that started like this and never went anywhere, because that's the only way that you like level up your chops of designing cubes. So go make bad cubes. You don't have to buy them in paper. You don't need to even let anybody play them. You know, throw stuff onto a list in Cube Cobra and just let yourself be confused at how good or bad it ends up being.
Yeah. I mean, there's the saying that's like, if you build something for everybody, you built it for nobody. So, you know, build it for the weirdos. Yeah. So I agree.
Yeah. Everyone is not going to draft a cube. So,
yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you so much for coming on, Jane. This has been a blast. And please like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.